Implicit contracts and efficiency wages. The simplest economic approach reduces the employment relationship to self-interested employers and employees buying and selling labor in a spot market for labor. A spot market is like going to a farmer's market. The transactions are immediate and short-term. From this perspective, employers and employees are constantly on the lookout for better deals, so there isn't a long-term relationship, just a series of short-term ones, even if within the same job for the same employer. But a richer approach is to see employers and employees governed by implicit contracts that shape their expectations and actions over time in a longer-term relationship. Through an economic lens, this still emphasizes self-interested rational agents and work as disutility. So what's an implicit contract? A regular contract provides specific requirements for two or more parties, often in written form, and is legally enforceable. An implicit contract is more of a mutual understanding of expectations. It's like a psychological contract, but for our purposes here, think of an implicit contract as providing more specific expectations about job performance and rewards. But if it's unenforceable, why should we even think of it as a contract? Because it can still be binding on the parties, at least up to a point. In particular, if an employer doesn't fulfill its promises, its reputation could be damaged, making it harder to recruit and retain workers, or the organization could face other problems if workers withdraw their effort or undertake other damaging actions out of frustration. So implicit contracts give us a way of thinking about how economically oriented, self-interested employers and employees can engage in longer-term, enduring employment relationships. No, something more positive than that. Well, not that positive. Okay, that's better. I'll illustrate two examples in this video. The first is efficiency wages. The basic idea of an efficiency wage is that under the right circumstances, paying above market compensation will incentivize greater effort. Conveniently, we can repurpose the promotions via a standard graph to consider an efficiency wage. Recall the promotion via a standard graph in which a worker is promoted to a position with increased compensation, delta W, if their effort exceeds some threshold, EP. Under the right conditions, the increased compensation from the promotion can incentivize additional effort. If we modify what the key elements of this graph represent, it can instead capture an efficiency wage. More specifically, think of W as indicating the level of pay a worker can get in the labor market. Delta W is the amount the company pays above the market, and EP is changed to EF and represents the effort threshold needed to not be fired. In other words, if the worker is fired, they experience a penalty of delta W because they will only be able to earn W elsewhere. The threat of this pay reduction can motivate additional effort, as long as the effort costs aren't too high and the additional compensation is large enough. Here's an example where the additional compensation is not enough to make up for the effort required, and the worker is better off exerting less effort and working for less pay elsewhere. But again, under the right circumstances, an efficiency wage can be an effective incentive. This is an example of an implicit contract because the worker commits to working harder in return for an implicit promise not to fire the worker even though the worker is paid more than the market rate. So the firm has the power to fire the worker, and a higher wage is not enforced by labor market competition. So this arrangement only works if the worker and employer see this as a mutual understanding that they will live up to. In other words, this is a form of an implicit contract. This is also one possible explanation for the puzzle that wages are sticky and don't fall during a recession. Namely, lowering an efficiency wage would violate the implicit contract, and workers would be less likely to work harder in the future because it would be more difficult for the organization to convince workers that it will live up to its promises. So to maintain its reputation and ability to make implicit contracts, an organization might not lower compensation even when it could. Turning to the second example, a classic example of an implicit contract is a compensation system in which pay rises with seniority. Don't equate this to explicit programs where a certain number of years in the organization triggers a particular rate of pay in some pre-specified or formulaic way. This also includes the more common situation where more senior workers generally earn more on average. Consider a worker who expects to spend many years at one company. Graphically, we can measure time with the company, that is seniority, on the horizontal axis, and dollars on the vertical axis, which can capture both the dollar value of the worker's productivity and their compensation. The company would like this worker to stay on a high effort path for their career. But if work is stressful or conflicts with leisure, then it might be tempting for the worker to slack off at some point and fall off the high performer career path. So the company wants to provide an incentive for the worker to stay on the high effort career path. Any ideas? One possibility is to pay a bonus at the end of the worker's career if they are still a high performer. This is similar to an efficiency wage in that the threat of losing this bonus can provide an incentive to exert effort and avoid shirking. But this bonus reduces the firm's profits. So to make up for this loss at the end, the firm could try paying the worker less than their worth earlier in their career. In effect, the surplus accumulated in the first part of the worker's career is being paid back to them toward the end as an incentive. But put yourself in the worker's shoes. What should you be concerned with? A rational worker will look ahead and see how things are expected to work out. They would notice that the firm is making two promises. One, to pay the worker less than they are worth early in their career. Two, to pay the worker more than they are worth later in their career. There's little doubt that the firm will live up to its first promise, but what incentive does the firm have at time T? The firm's self-interest is to fire the worker at time T and pocket the surplus earned up to that point before starting to pay it back to the worker. So in order to agree to this compensation arrangement, the worker needs to trust the company not to fire them before the end of the career rewards are paid. Enter the implicit contract. I said, enter the implicit contract. The firm can make an implicit contract with the employee by committing to a seniority-based compensation system. Workers will likely find this more believable in stable organizations with good reputations that are expected to thrive for a while. Startups, on the other hand, might need to find a different solution, such as stock options. But here's another complication. The compensation system needs to be designed to repay all of the surplus by a certain time so that everything balances out. Suppose that's age 65. What incentive does the worker have at that point? To keep working longer and pocket extra money. This would harm the organization. Since mandatory retirement is illegal in most cases, the organization might need to structure retirement incentives to give the worker the right motivation. We just can't escape incentives. But this highlights that self-interest can be complicated, so an important lesson is that employees and employers both need to think dynamically and understand the incentives of the other side now and in the future. Workers need to assess whether a firm is likely to live up to its commitments, and the firm needs to similarly determine whether it's in an employee's self-interest to see things through as initially indicated. Or might they, for example, have an incentive to delay retirement? Another lesson is to think about the importance of reciprocity and the risks to an organization of failing to fulfill its end of various bargains or implicit contracts. If you break this contract, it might not only harm a worker directly, but the broader damage is likely to be to the company's reputation. This can make it more difficult to recruit, retain, and motivate workers moving forward. In conclusion, it's useful to consider when economically oriented employers and employees can use implicit contracts to govern their expectations and actions in long-term employment relationships. Two other examples from elsewhere in this course are probationary periods in an earlier unit and cost-sharing compensation arrangements for providing mixed training in a later unit.